What's going on, guys? Pete Nova here from the Faceoff Sports Network. Today, I have a special episode. We are going to do a Denver Broncos NFL free agency primer slash talk a little bit about the offseason NFL draft. I do have a special guest here with me today. It is Cody Rourke of the Locked On podcast, as well as serves as a beat reporter for Mile High Sports, is a host over at the Locked On Broncos podcast as well. Cody, thank you so much for giving me some of your time. Excited to kind of jump into it. But first and foremost, how are things going on your side? I know things are starting to ramp up here for you.
Yeah, I mean, since the Super Bowl ended, there's been a little bit of a breathing period before, obviously, the combine, which was, a week and a half, 2 weeks ago at this point. And then now, obviously, with free agency coming up, things are set to get really, really busy. I mean, honestly, covering the NFL, it is a year-round thing. Like, a lot of people think, hey, okay, season's over. All right, you're off. What are you doing? No, it's still a lot of writing, still a lot of content creation, still a lot of covering the team. There's always events. And we're now transitioning to where I think the NFL is eventually going to move to where free agency and all the other stuff, we're going to have these start times a little bit earlier than normal here. We had the NFL combine before free agency and the NFL draft, which is, interesting. It's usually before the draft. So there's that. And then OTAs, rookie mini camp, all this stuff is coming up. And then, you really only get like 1 month off, but the NFL, they're talking about maybe starting training camp in June, not this year, obviously, I think, but like going forward, it's something that is being looked at. Which means that football is going to be a year-round thing, which I think is good for everyone who's in the hunt for it.
Yeah, I mean, it means more content creation. It means more chatter, more things going on, right? Less of an off season. NFL probably appreciates that more too because it has the league on the mind for people more. I mean, junkies like me and yourself are probably always thinking about it regardless, so it doesn't really matter about the dead space. But yeah, I mean, so I know right now you're working at Mile High Sports, right? You're a beat reporter there. Just tell me a little bit how long you've been covering the Broncos. When did you get started in the business? Just tell us a little bit more about your background.
Yeah, I've been covering the Broncos since 2017. That's when I first got into the industry. And I mean, here we are, 2025. It's crazy. We're almost at the 10-year mark here. And I mean, it's tough. Like I always try to tell people, I get people that message me all the time. How do you get into the sports media industry? I feel like it's harder today to do it than it was back when I started in 2017. Now, obviously, there's different avenues there to write about, the team that you like. But the reality of like actually getting a job in sports media, it's very, very difficult now. And honestly, I would think if I would have started today fresh, I think it would be very hard today. Everyone's got a podcast. Everyone's got a thing. I always try to tell people, okay, if you're doing something that everybody else is already doing, how are you going to stand out? How are you going to separate yourself? So that's one of the things that, I think a lot of, what I do in terms of my job is, I write a ton, I shoot my own B-roll footage at practice. I edit my own B-roll footage. I put it out on social media. You have to be multifaceted, almost like video, media, audio, writing, whatever it may be. Keeps you busy, and on top of just the day-to-day, because there could be like a day in the regular season where one player gets hurt, one player gets released. There's a big storyline or a rumor that comes out. There's 5 different things you have to cover. And it's like, dang, I got to hit all of this, and you're a one-person crew at this point. So it's a grind. But that's just kind of, I think what you get the enjoyment out of, right? There's times where it's a grind and you just wish, that, hey, can I get a reset button here? The bye week is great, but the bye week doesn't give you a time to kind of refresh or reset because there's still stuff that you have to do there. So,
Sure.
Love it. Honestly, it is a grind. It's not easy, but if it was easy, everybody would be doing it. But I'm fortunate. I mean, I'm lucky to be in the position I'm in. I enjoy it because I feel like for me, everyone wants to get into the sports media world. A lot of people, they want to become insiders. They want to become people that get scoops and break stories. I don't care about breaking a story. If I come across it or someone tells me something, okay, that's awesome. I used to want to do that. And then once you start realizing it's kind of shady in a sense, like you have to put some stuff out there that, is not going to make some people happy. And that I think is where it's like, I don't want to be remembered for that. I don't care about being first on a story. And I think that's a thing that people get is like, you got to be first on it. You got to get the credit. I've broken stories before. I've gotten the credit. Okay. It's a little bit of an adrenaline rush from time to time, but that's not something I want to chase every single day. It's building that, meaningful relationships with players, coaches, executives, and other people in the media world. I think that's really what it's all about. But it ain't easy, but it's fun. It's a wild ride. It always keeps you on your toes. You never know what's going to happen. And this is an industry I think that is very uncertain, because everyone's doing it and just trying to figure out how do you continue to separate yourself. Like myself, I think about that, but I also think about like companies start to think about how can we start to separate ourselves from what other companies are doing, and that I think is where the challenge is for the whole entire industry in itself.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like a pretty cornered market, I guess, so to speak. There's a lot of the top dogs, right? And then there's beat reporters for local teams as well. I think fantasy sports has been an avenue for guys like myself, right? Who maybe necessarily, it's not necessarily a cornered market, right? I think a lot of people that interact and watch and take advice, they're going to fantasy sports analysts because they just want opinions from multiple different people, right? And so whereas maybe someone that's covering the actual sport itself, like an NFL team, right? It's not so much of it's your opinion, which you do a good job with on Locked On Sports, right? But it's also kind of they're getting facts from you, right, about the team, and so it's kind of hard. There's only so many people that can give that information
Yeah.
out. Where in fantasy sports, it's been more of a creative side of things, where it's been a different avenue to give guys a chance to kind of get into the sport and break through that way. But again, appreciate you jumping on. Nice to kind of hear your background, and I've obviously followed you for a pretty long time, so this is pretty cool to kind of get a chance to connect like this.
Yeah. Thank
Um,
you.
yeah, and I guess jumping into the meat and potatoes of why we're really here, right? Let's kind of talk a little bit about the Broncos and just get a little bit of an idea. So when it comes to free agency, right? I mean, I think there's obviously a lot of names that are kind of getting thrown around, right? Nick Bolton, Devontae Adams, Juwan Johnson. I guess the first question would be, what do you think is going to be the highest paid position that this team spends on if you had to guess in free agency?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, you got to weigh the pros and cons here of inside linebacker. If Zach Bond was was available and didn't re-sign with Philadelphia, I think he could have been an option. The Broncos maybe would have been in on at that point in time. To me, now that he's kind of one of those dominoes that's off the table, I'm thinking either wide receiver or safety is probably going to be the bigger spend in terms of overall contract valuation at that point. And factor in that, could also consider Cortland Sutton getting a contract extension either before or after the NFL draft. That's something that Cortland's team would like to have done. I know the Broncos would like to have him back here in 2025. He's entering the last year of his deal, but they want a little bit of that long term. Cortland does as well, and he's certainly earned it in these last 2 seasons. 18 touchdowns in 2 years, and he's kind of been a guy that didn't matter who the quarterback is. He's going to be a player who produces for you. He's at a point now where he's been healthy, so that's been a good trend for Cortland, obviously, at this point. But I think they go out there and they sign another receiver, a veteran guy here for a guy like Bo Nix. You need as many weapons as you can get while you still have your young guys like the Marvin Mims, the Devon Valets, and the Troy Franklins, these guys that are continuing to develop here. You just need another reliable guy that is proven that, hey, okay, it's third down. Teams are going to double team Cortland Sutton. Do you have another veteran option you can go to, right? And this could also come in the form of a tight end as well. I mean, you had a guy up on the graphic screen there a moment ago, Juwan Johnson. A lot of people are talking about the former ties to, obviously the New Orleans Saints, or as we now say, the New Orleans Broncos at this point. I would say I don't think Juwan Johnson will be as much of a guy that they go and try to target here, in my opinion. Like from my perspective, and this is mine only, I don't think he's necessarily a needle mover that they are looking for at the position. I truly think that they'll probably look in this year's NFL draft at a tight end, whether that comes round 1, round 2, round 3. I expect them to address it with one of their first 3 picks in this year's NFL draft in April. But Juwan Johnson, I just don't know if that's going to be the needle mover that's going to excite Broncos fans there. Obviously, he's athletic, he's big, but the Broncos, they need a guy who could be a game changer. Sean Payton's been saying it. He's looking for the Joker, right? Either a running back or a tight end that is very athletic, has elite level receiving skills there. That's what they're looking for. It's hard to find those guys. Juwan Johnson isn't necessarily that guy there. So I agree with Tip Major, Terrence Ferguson. Like I said, I grew up, in Oregon. I played high school ball in Oregon. I was an Oregon Ducks fan growing up. And so watching Terrence Ferguson the last couple of years has been fun. I was talking to guys like Bo Nix in the locker room, Alex Forsythe, and even Troy Franklin last year about Ferguson. I'd talk to them about the Ducks in season in the locker room, and Ferguson could play. He's big. I think if people watch what he was able to do at the Senior Bowl, that right there, kind of stands out. Okay, he's big, he's physical, he can you get away from defenders there. He's got that big body type there, and then you see him at the NFL Combine running the fastest 40 amongst all tight ends. 40 speed, not necessarily something that, I think a lot of teams really care about that point. But, you've got your 3 cone. Can you change directions quickly? He's big, can create contact, can create separation from linebackers. That might be what the Broncos are looking for. I like that as well. I also see Michael says anything on Mike Gesicki. That's also another veteran option I think Denver could take a look at here. Cincinnati's got some tough decisions, obviously, with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, trying to get the contracts with them. Trey Hendrickson's going to be traded at this point. So I think Mike Gesicki would be available at this point. And honestly, why not? The Broncos saw him up close and personal. They had no answer for him against Cincinnati when they played there. So the good thing I think about Denver here in free agency, Pete, is they have options. They have options. They have salary cap flexibility. You come to terms that you extend a guy like Zach Allen, Nick Bonito, or Cortland Sutton, you create even more salary cap space for you going into this season. And then obviously next year you got a massive load of free agency, salary cap space, and you don't have any more of that Russell Wilson dead cap money that's holding you back. So they're in a position, if they want to be aggressive this year, they can. But, George and them said that they could be measured, which isn't a bad approach for them either. They were measured last year. But I think the positions they're going to get here in free agency, I think it's going to be a receiver, inside linebacker, and also a safety.
Yeah, I mean, and that definitely makes sense. Terrence Ferguson, I feel like was probably one of the biggest winners at the combine too. Some guys didn't test really well, like Harold Fannin Jr., which I think people were expecting a little bit more from. I don't think Mason Taylor ran the 40 either, but he looked pretty good as well. But and there's some Denver ties there, I think, with Peyton and Mason Taylor. I've read as well. I don't know your thoughts on him, but I mean, I think Ferguson would be nice, right? His size allows him to be on the field for a lot of different packages and formations. Whereas, you look at some of these other guys like Arroyo, or Fannin, who, are kind of more of a move tight end, which I don't know if that's what Peyton's looking for. You might have a better idea there. And that's why I kind of worry about the Gesicki thing. And I'd be curious to know, with Gesicki, his blocking ability, does that concern you as a guy that maybe they wouldn't really target because of that? Or because I worry about Dulcich, right? He didn't get
Yeah.
on the field, but he was also dropping a ton of passes. So you got to,
Yeah, I don't think that would concern necessarily Sean. One of the things that Sean's talked about too, he says, okay, like when you're getting a tight end, and often at times in today's NFL, when you're getting these tight ends coming out of college, unless it's really from Iowa seems to be the exception these days, or Georgia Tech, because
sure.
they're a blocking offense primarily. A lot of these tight ends that are coming in are receiving tight ends that have to learn how to block, and Sean is very cognizant of, okay, we know what this guy can do. Can we work with him on some of these things, like understanding your angles that you're going to have, if you are undersized as a blocker, understanding leverage there. That's something that Greg Dulcich didn't necessarily pick up, even though he was explosive as an athlete. Disappointing he never formulated here, because he could have been that joker there, but just couldn't formulate it in the pass catching game. He was a little bit more of a glorified receiver at that point, just a big guy, but was not able to do the stuff that Sean ultimately wanted them to do. But now they got, they're going into another season with Adam Troutman, who's going to be guaranteed to be on the roster here, a veteran guy. When they go 12 personnel, he's their best blocking tight end alongside Nate Atkins. Those two guys will be back here in 2025 in terms of, I think, being on the 53-man roster. But Adkins could move to that fullback role, depending on if they bring Michael Burton back at fullback or not. And then that opens up another spot. I know they have Thomas Yasmin on a futures contract. He came over. Obviously, he received the exemption from the International Player Pathway Program. So that's something that they're going to look at, just different body types. I think that they go veteran in free agency. They'll add a guy, but I also think they go in the NFL draft. And a lot of people are keeping their eye on Colston Loveland from Michigan, or obviously Tyler Warren out of Penn State. Those are perceived the two top best options in this year's draft. But it's like, does a team like Cincinnati maybe try to move up to get one of those guys? Does a team like the Chargers try to do that? Is Harbaugh try to get, is he going to try to reunite with Colston Loveland there? Get Justin Herbert another weapon at that point? They're also in a position to make moves. So Denver's going to have to be smart with how they go about it. And if they identify a guy that they really like, you have to find a way to come away with them.
Yeah, and so that kind of transitions to the NFL draft as well, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about, Denver's picking at 20. I know in the past George Payton's loved to be a guy that's going to trade back, accumulate more picks, have more dart throws, right? That's always kind of been the classic thing when he came in initially in Denver. And Sean Payton seems kind of opposite, right? Where he likes to be aggressive and will be more comfortable going up and getting the guy that he wants to get. if you had to put your finger on it today, maybe it doesn't necessarily have to be who they draft, but um, if if you had to put some money down on it, what do you think? Are they going to stick and pick? Do you think they would trade back, or do you think they would trade up? I mean, I know it's hard saying it now because you don't really know
Mhm.
what the board looks like, but say I don't know, Genty falls past the Cowboys, which seems unlikely at this point. But if Genty and Warren are there, is there a possibility they trade up for one of those guys? I mean, or do you think they're likely going to stick and pick or push back?
Yeah, I think if there's a guy that they really like, I could see them trading up at least maybe 5 spots, maybe to pick 15, maybe I don't know, maybe even to the top 12 if they can. I think so much of the language depends on what any of those other teams are looking for that are ahead of them that Denver can, okay, hey, maybe is there a guy they identify that can maybe be there if they swap picks and that team moves to pick number 20, is the guy that they want still going to be there? Certainly a possibility there. But if they don't trade up, I see them primarily sticking at 20. I don't see them trading back and acquiring more capital. I think that they're trying to get as many talented players as they can. And when you're picking at number 20, like, obviously you're still going to be getting a good player, but it's not necessarily like your position you were in last year with, hey, at pick number 12, wow, okay, hey, Bo Nix is available. He's one of the best guys you have identified on your board. Your pickings kind of slim down a little bit. So Denver, I think they've made good hay in the last couple of years with some of their second round picks, third round picks. That's primarily what they've only had in the last couple of years. Anyways, it's been a while since they've had a first round pick, except last year with Bo Nix. So I think the primary thing is they're going to stick put at 20, take best player available. That seems to be their approach. But if there's a player that they absolutely have on their radar that say, hey, this is our must have, we can't miss out on this guy, but we don't know if he's going to be there, I could see them maybe moving up.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's such a deep class, especially in the trenches, right? Running back is deep as well. I know Broncos fans really want them to take a swing there. I think there's a lot, the receivers are it feels kind of gray at this point where there's not a lot of standouts, right? A lot of, once you kind of get past Tet McMillan,
Yeah.
Tet's kind of moving around. Now you have Matthew Golden after that 40-yard dash. A lot of like Daniel Jeremiah and some of these other guys like McShay have him kind of pushed up as the number one wide receiver now, right? But like, I mean, I don't personally, do you think wide receiver is a possibility? Because I've seen, other, Denver beat writers, and they've a lot of them have pretty much said they would bet that they wouldn't take a wide receiver in
Mhm.
round one. If they did take a skill position, it's likely tight end or running back. Do you have a lean as to where do you think there's truth to that, or if is there a guy that you think they could target at
Yeah.
20 if he's still there?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be wide receiver at all for them. I think when you look at this year's free agency class, there are so many wide receivers, and there's a handful of really good veterans that are available. I mean, the wide receiver market, because of the supply and demand, is going to kind of set its own price. I think the exception is going to be when Jamar Chase gets his contract. Justin Jefferson's already got his. CD's got his. T. Higgins, I don't know what he's going to get potentially here, but ideally, Jamar Chase is probably going to be the last time we see a wide receiver get that type of money. I think the market won't necessarily fall, but I think that it will kind of reset a little bit. It's not going to be as high as I think what Jamar is going to get at this point. I think it's going to probably drop to maybe like the 20s to mid 20s here in the next 2 or 3 years. So right now you got a bunch of guys, veteran guys that are available, quality guys there. Denver, they really love what they have with their three young wide receivers with Marvin Mims, with Troy Franklin, Devon Vele. They have a young guy on the roster. Last year was on the practice squad, and A.T. Perry, who's 6'5", has really, really good speed there. He was a standout on the practice squad for them, and they're hoping he can maybe take a step further here in training camp and maybe make a name for himself. We know Sean Payton likes players with size, but he's going to have to compete for a roster spot at this point. But I think Denver's just really looking to get Bo Nix, another veteran guy there in the mix at that position. So they're not in a position where they have to spend big on it. So I think that leaves them the options in the NFL draft. I honestly think it's either tight end, it's running back, or I think it'll be adding another defensive lineman. I think with this year's defensive line class, the Broncos, they've talked about continuing to invest in the trenches. Their offensive line, they love that. They believe that unit is kind of set in stone there. At least at 4 of the 5 positions. Center, a little bit of a question mark. I know they like Luke Wattenberg, but they also like Alex Forsythe. So there might be some more competition at center, but really left tackle, left guard, right tackle is all solidified for the Broncos for the foreseeable future. So for me, it's tight end, it's running back, or it's D line.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going as well. Now, in terms of roster construction, right? You see a lot of teams like the Jaguars who have, released and, had a lot of cap casualties pretty much, quite frankly. And you see a lot of teams moving on, Trey Hendrickson, obviously, they can't get a deal done. He's now going to hit free agency. Maybe it's one of those weird things where well, he's not getting released, but, going to get traded. But is there a player that's maybe on the roster that you think is a cap casualty, or is there a name, like a Troy Franklin or a Jaleel McLaughlin, right? Or I don't know about Estime, but is there a name that you think could be a surprise, not make the roster, and or is there a cap casualty like an Alex Singleton, who I think seems like he's going to come back, because I feel like they would have maybe made that move by now, with it coming and approaching. But is there any names that come to mind to you?
Honestly, at this point, I don't see a name where Denver is going to release a guy like you said. I think if they were going to do that, it would have already happened. I know beforehand, maybe a week, 2 weeks ago, a lot of people thought, okay, hey, is it going to be Alex Singleton? He's coming off of an ACL injury. The Broncos can free up this cap space. Some people have brought up PJ Locke. Obviously Locke didn't have, I think, the best 2024 in his eyes. He'll tell you that there, but the Broncos are still very high on what he can do. He can be playing the box and play the middle of the field there. I still think they add a safety there to that position, alongside Brandon Jones and PJ. There might be some competition there. But I felt like those were the two names that we were primarily hearing people talk about, and those moves never happened. I mean, Alex is at the team facility every day going through rehab recovery. He's running, doing sprints now. They expect him to be fully ready to go for the start of training camp at this point, and likely put him on a little bit of a pitch count as things start once you actually get to the football and the contact side of it. So I think we would have already seen that move happen now. Now, anything can still happen if they're trying to make some more space here, but they feel like they have enough operating room at this point to make some moves. And obviously, if they can come to terms on an extension with one of their key guys that are eligible for it, Zach Allen being one, Nick Bonito, Cortland Sutton, they have room right there to create some more salary cap space. They can even approach guys like Pat Surtain, Quinn Miners for a restructure, get them a little bit of a signing bonus. So that's the benefit. Like when people say, like when I tell people, hey, the Broncos have the richest ownership group in all of pro sports, when you have a cash-rich ownership group, that's where these things can help you, not necessarily bending the salary cap, but it's like, hey, you can give these guys a signing bonus up front and create more overall space for you because you have the cash on hand to be able to do that. So I don't think we're going to see any changes happen here so far. I think Denver's going to stand pat with where they're at.
Yeah, and that's kind of good to hear. I mean, I like I said, I think if it was going to happen, it probably would have happened by now. Shifting gears, Denver made a lot of different a lot of different coaching hires. Special teams coach Darren Rizzi, obviously the Saints connection there. Todd Davis, Broncos linebacker, a guy that was in Denver media, now going back to coaching. And then you also have, Chris Morgan going to the offensive line, and then a lot of promotions, right? I believe, Jim Leonard was promoted assistant coach, and I don't know what the other title was, Zach Strief as well. So if you had to guess, when it comes, and I don't know how connected you are, how much you talk to even the assistant coaches, right? You're probably more plugged into the players, but is there a assistant coach on this team? Who do you think makes the biggest impact? Not talking DC, not Vance, not Lombardi, not Peyton. Who is the guy that maybe people don't see, maybe not the recognition, or maybe gets the recognition, but is an integral part to the team and coaching these guys up?
Well, I'll give you three names there. First off, I think Davis Webb got probably, the more mindful promotion. Just thinking Jim Leonard, as you mentioned as well. But for Davis Webb, he's a quarterback's coach. Now he's the passing game coordinator and the QB's coach, passing game coordinator. That went to Johnny Moe, who's obviously now the offensive coordinator with the Detroit Lions. Davis has had a really massive ascension here so far to start his coaching career. He's going to be a very hot candidate next year in the hiring cycle or for some potential offensive coordinator jobs around the NFL. Him getting the experience working with QBs is great. But now with the passing game title, if the Broncos offense takes a huge step forward here this upcoming season, that could lead to him getting maybe, looks for OC jobs. That's a very big one for the Broncos. You mentioned Jim Leonard was the defensive backs coach and the passing game coordinator last year. Now he's really just kind of overseeing the passing game at that point in terms of, the Broncos coverage schemes, what that's going to look like against the opponent's passing games and their setup there. But he's also the assistant head coach, right? So what the Broncos have is they have three coaches at each position that are assistant head coaches in a sense, right? Darren Rizzi, special teams coordinator, assistant head coach. Now you have Jim Leonard, defensive passing game coordinator, assistant head coach on the defensive side of the ball. And then Zach Streif was the offensive run game coordinator slash at this point assistant head coach. So there's kind of these different monikers that are being passed off there. Well-deserved promotions. The third name there, obviously I mentioned Davis Webb, Jim Leonard. I would even go with cornerback coach Addison Lynch is a name to watch. He was a defensive quality control coach for the last couple of seasons. Did work with the secondary last year, but he's done a tremendous job working with the Broncos young cornerback group. They believe that he's a good coach fit there that's going to help those guys continue to develop. Pat Surtain obviously connects with him relatively well. Riley Moss, and they're very pleased with what they've seen with how far along Chris Abrams-Drain and Jaquan McMillan have come along. And they got some other young guys on the roster, Reese Taylor, who will be back for training camp here once again. Denver's very comfortable with their cornerback group, and they believe that Addison Lynch is going to be a big part of the continued development of that unit.
Yeah, and that's really not a name that I recognize, so that's definitely a nice little tidbit to throw in there. Last question for you, because we're coming up on the 30-minute mark. You have had time with PFN, right? And now you're here with Mile High Sports, right? You're doing the Lockdown podcast. You've had a chance to really connect with a lot of NFL players. I believe you were at Radio Row a few years back as well,
Yeah.
right? So you've pretty much gotten some really awesome experience to connect with a lot of players. Is there a specific player? It doesn't have to be a Denver Bronco. And
Yeah.
and look, if anybody goes to your profile, you can obviously see in your header it's with Justin Herbert, right? I'm sure that was a pretty cool interview. But is there an interview? It doesn't have to be with the highest profile guy, but is there one interview that stands out to you that might have been one of your favorites, or just left an impact on you, or just felt more meaningful? That maybe a connection you made.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. I mean, you mentioned Radio Row. There was Justin Herbert. The cool thing is, like, when I first got into coaching, Justin Herbert was in high school, so I got to watch him in high school when I was coaching. When he was a high school player at Sheldon High School in Eugene. Then obviously the whole tie, he got to go play, for the Oregon Ducks. That was cool there because he and I bonded over that. But I mean, Barry Sanders was one. Chad Ochocinco. Chad is obviously a great guy there. I actually played him in Madden when I was a sophomore in high school. So we kind of bonded over that. But if there's like any player that I've sat down, I've interviewed, I've gotten to know really on a personal level that has had an impact on me, I'd say Justin Simmons is probably one of the most genuine, down-to-earth human beings I've ever gotten the chance to get to know and interview and cover, more so, not only just, on the field, but the stuff he does off the field. He and his wife, Taryn, with their foundation, the Justin Simmons Foundation, they do such a fantastic job still here in the community of Denver. They live here still. They're very much active. And Justin's just the type of guy that, something's going on in your life, he finds out about it, he'll reach out to you to make sure, hey, is everything good? You okay? Like stuff like that. To me, that's what it's all about. And I encourage anyone that's getting into sports media. I understand it's no matter what sport, mainly football, though, it is a gladiator mentality most of the time, I think, from a lot of people who watch the game. But if you're in a position where you get to be around these guys, get to know them, like you learn so much, right? Obviously they understand my position as a journalist where I have to cover the team, but I never make my analysis personal. If a player struggles, I mention that the player struggles, but it's the language. I don't use like, oh, this player sucked. Like that's not professional in any way, shape, or form. And I can tell you, there are a lot of guys out there that, have platforms that say stuff, but they don't necessarily get to go to the locker room, right? So they don't necessarily have to be held accountable. Like if I write something bad and a player sees me in the locker room, they're going to say like, hey, I saw what you wrote. Like you got to be able to be accountable for it. Get to know the stories of these guys as humans before football players. To me, I think that's what's the most rewarding part about this industry. Guys like Justin really kind of drive that home.
Yeah, it sounds like you've had a really good chance to kind of. I mean, did you grow up as a Broncos fan, or?
Yeah.
Right.
I was. So my family, when I was born, obviously I was born in Colorado. My family, they were all Broncos fans. So I grew up as a kid watching the Broncos. But then once I got into media, I realized very quickly, like, hey, you can't be a fan anymore. Like you got to kill your fandom if people are going to take you serious, because, when it comes to the team that they like, can you be objective? Can you talk about the good? Can you talk about the bad without it seeing like you're slanted one way or the other there? That's really, and honestly, it wasn't that hard. Like it's really cool. Like, as a kid, the outcomes of games used to really affect me. for me now, like if the Broncos win, it's great for me because, players are in a great mood. The audience, they're excited about it. We've covered plenty of losing teams, for Denver, but there's always an interest from the fan base, and the fan base is relying on me to bring them as close as I can to the team. Because not a lot of people are willing to do it. Like, it's hard. It takes a lot of mental anguish out of me to be able to do it. But it's like, I try to respond to as many people as I can. If they have questions, I try to share what I see, what I hear, stuff that I'm allowed to talk about, obviously, that's on the record versus it being off the record. But it's challenging. It's mentally draining at times because, hey, like, fans are passionate, and when seasons, everything's going on full speed, like, people want to know what's going on. I try my best to respond to everybody. It's tough though.
Yeah, I could imagine. Well, hey, look, I appreciate you coming on. This was great. I guess, maybe tell the people a little bit. I mean, I know I kind of plugged you already, but plug yourself, tell people where they can find you and what you have anything going on, any projects, anything specific that you're working on.
Yeah, obviously you can check out my written work daily over there, milehighsports.com. If you want to know what's going on with the Broncos on a daily basis, that's the place to be. Also, if you want fresh daily Broncos news, content coverage, whatever it may be, Lockdown Broncos, we bring you a fresh episode every Monday through Friday, weekdays. And obviously with free agency coming up, that means something could happen on a Saturday. So, hey, bonus content, bonus episodes to break down what's happening in free agency. And then also I do a film room study over there at Mile High Sports. So anytime the Broncos, whoever they sign in free agency, you'll have a film room up on their YouTube channel as well that'll go through, like, what are you getting from this player? So just a lot of that. And I'm excited, but, it's going to be very busy. Going to have a lot of coffee over the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, well, you'll get a lot of use out of it, that's for sure. But I know you got a lot going on, so good luck next week with everything, and thanks for jumping on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate you. And we'll do this again sometime.
All right, sounds good.